your presentations. Given the time, we are going to adjust the format a little bit. We're going to crimp our speakers a little bit and not give them a chance to ask questions of each other immediately. But they do have a chance to ask these in private later, so they will get asked. What I'd like to go to, I'm not totally short-circuiting the audience participation because I'm building this off a question, which was, what are the role of extension agents in distributing this kind of agricultural knowledge? And there was a request there, and I think it's a good one. I want to do very quickly, just stand up and sit down. How many extension agents might we have in the audience right here?
How many what?
Anybody brave enough to stand up? There's one in the front. We have a few more. Okay, and I suspect there are more in the online.
All right. Universal.
All right.
What an extension agent is.
Yeah, in case you don't know what an agricultural extension agent is on the front line of distributing agricultural knowledge. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to get that question in there. But the larger question with this, for Dr. Lal and Dr. Chanu, we have some pretty clear, you have some disagreements, but you have a general, and we have some ideas from this morning of things that work in regards to climate sequestration. What kind of policy, education, and I would say knowledge distribution system do we need to move forward on this? And I know this puts many of us outside of our comfort zone, not all of us, but it puts us in a place where we all have to think about this. So I'd like you to answer that, and then other people can chime in as we go along. Thank you.
You want me to begin?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I think in terms of policy, we need to really have a very channel of communication with policymakers, between the scientific community, extension agents, and the policymakers. Many times they are not knowledgeable. French case is a very good example. The French Minister of Agriculture, Mr. Stéphane Le Foll, and the current minister and the French Prime Minister, they were the one going to the scientific community. They were the one pushing cattle per mil. They were the one asking for Planet A. So if the policymakers are not forthcoming, there is no reason why scientific community cannot go to them. So somewhere that channel of communication should exist. We should be, education part, I think what is being done in this college here is an excellent example, but we really need to go back to the secondary school and primary school. I think it's at the primary school level we really begin to, students to know the importance of soil and importance of agriculture to the environment, so that by the time they reach secondary school and college, they already know what the issues are. That education, general public, I'm really glad you have invited people of general public from a broader field of humanity around the community. Community involvement somewhere is very important. I want to keep coming back, making farmers realize that the society on the whole appreciates what they are doing. That's a part which lack. Somewhere, even in this country, but definitely in the developed, agriculture is considered a second-class business. It's not, you will do agriculture if there was nothing else to do. That's not the case. Agriculture is such a profession that it is our duty to make sure that farmers realize that we really appreciate what they do. We appreciate what Army does for us. Which we should. We appreciate what the police does for us. On the other, why not make sure that farmers appreciate, because they are the custodian of the environment. They are custodians of natural resources. And that has to be a part of education to the general community.
Professor Chanu.
Okay, regarding education, I think we need more at different levels, from primary school to the general public. And for the general public, maybe the first way is to know about soils, to know that there's a whole universe underfoot, that souls exist and souls are not granted. Everyone thinks souls are granted. And regarding also agriculture, I think there's a need for the general public to understand that agriculture is not viewed, to leave this simplistic way of agriculture being harmful. And I like very much what you said, Ratan, that we all are responsible. We all are happy to buy cheap food. but this has huge consequences on ecosystems and indirectly on our way of being and how our children will live on this planet. So this is for education. I also think that training for farmers and extensionists can be improved. Sustainable agriculture and soil preservation and improvement is extremely knowledge intensive, much more than technology. It's knowledge intensive. So we have to adapt the training, the education for that. Regarding policy, what I have learned during the International Year of Soil and also during my teaching activities is that policymakers, and I teach to civil servants that are going to become policymakers, they are ignorant of ecology, that is how our resources function, how life, what are the cycles of element. They tend to forget about, this basic law that nothing is created, but everything is recycled. For me, they need that, so we need to train to educate better our policymakers. And yes, regarding what are the policy priorities, of course, the climate policies, but I think maybe it's because of where I come, but we need, in Europe at least, we need to protect soils from urbanization. And this is also requires knowledge. We need to, of course, we need to find places where to have our houses, trains, roads, but where to place them. And this could be oriented knowing better soil properties, because maybe we could manage to, to make better land planning, adapting to soil potentialities. Also, but again, this is very European, we have a common agricultural policy, and you probably know that in Europe, most of the subsidies farmers get are direct subsidies, a proportion of the land they have, a proportion of the food of the cattle they have. We need to change this policy to have it more oriented towards results, towards adopting practices, and towards, there's a lot of discussion, I think this is extremely interesting, is how could we evaluate, would it be possible to evaluate the quality of the soils of the farmers and maybe have a larger part of the subsidies based on that, giving them freedom in how to get there, because there are many ways to get there. There's not only, Ratan also said that, there's not only one good practice, many different management options, but the result is what counts.
Thank you. I'd like to open it up now for our other panelists to respond as they see to that question or to the talks, as you are called by your own response to the talks. So,
my takeaway from these two presentations is, well, first of all, there is no scarcity of things we can do and things we can talk about. And this is a cross-sectoral challenge. You just spoke about urbanization. Yes, you need to talk about where do people live, how they commute. All these things matter for climate change and they matter for the soil. So when it comes to having ideas and having approaches towards solutions, there is no lack. But I'd like to take a step back here and really look at the new role of, the new style of politics that we need and the new status of knowledge and how different it is from the way we talk about environmental challenges so far. I was talking with students about environmental politics in the 70s and 80s and what politics was at that time and how knowledge was on the side of the environmentalists. The argument was always, we know enough about the dangers of DDT, of leaded gasoline, etc., etc. We know enough to act. It was not a trivial act. Banning leaded gasoline took a huge struggle with vested interests, but at some point you could say, okay, there is the solution, we have this done. This is a campaign style of politics that you can use. I think that approach doesn't really work for the soil. What we need here is a more multifaceted approach. We need different approaches that run at the same time in different fields, and we need to think new about knowledge. This is the solution that we have here. These are not solutions that we can just take because we know what there is. We pointed out the uncertainties, experiments that went out differently than you expected. There is a lot of unknown in this. And I think we need a new style of politics where, no, we don't know everything, but we know something. We can make one step, we can take the next step, we can experiment we don't have a panacea, but we have many small steps, and we need a much more experimental, much more circumstep style of politics. And we need to see that no longer do we have just knowledge on our side, but also ignorance on our side. And we need to work under the knowledge that we do not know everything and make these many little steps ahead. It feels different from environmental politics as you know it.
Are there others of you that would like to respond?
Sure, I will. Yeah, I've worked in various ways of trying to affect policy through my career. I'm a Canadian, so it's a bit of a different system than here. And I'm a forester, so I work in the forest sector, and I've found it extremely frustrating to reach and change policy. The policies I was dealing with in the 1980s still exist, and they still are, haven't changed. However, and as a scientist, I was always like on the inside trying to change policy. And then as an academic, writing papers and trying to change policy that way, no movement. But I think that what has moved is that the public is becoming more aware. And I think that as scientists and educators, we are reaching the public, and the public plays a role in feeding back to the policymakers and the politicians that things need to change. And so then the scientists and the educators can come in again, and it's a big cycle, right? We're all part of this. We all play a certain role in changing policy, and it's not, it's not on any one of us as an individual group, but there's a feedback between all of those groups. And so as educators and scientists, if we can be good communicators to the policymakers, but more importantly to the public, then the public comes back to the politicians, who then make these broad sweeping changes or policies that, make no mistake, have a huge impact on our land and our carbon and our soil or organic matter. So it is. I think we can't forget that we're all part of this one big system, and we all have to work together.
Can I add a corollary to that? Maybe it's the British person in me, but I always feel very contrary to a single point. The problem with politics is that there's always an adversary going against you in that discussion, right? And I worked with the last administration extensively on better diets for people. What's the best diet you could possibly imagine to stop people from, getting sick. And there's always somebody, some organization working against you. So who's working against us? Because, Ratan, you made an extremely good point, as did you, Claire. It seems bloody obvious, to use an English vernacular, right? Seems really, really fundamentally honest. And I'm actually now more scared now than I was before your talks, right? Because I'm now like, oh my God, this is worse than nuclear weapons. We need to do something about this now. And I'm terrified that there isn't an easy way of doing it. So there are obstacles in policy, but who are the people that are going to put up the biggest fight against this? And how do we overcome them? Because when you talk about lead and problems in our water and poisoning items that we can overcome, there was an adversary. There was somebody talking against that, saying, no, the policy's fine, we need to keep that in place. So who do we have to overcome at a national level, at an international level, for that to become a reality?
Well, the thing that's actually made me something of an optimist on this issue is that the farmers I visited who had greatly reduced their inputs, had been more efficient in terms of food production per unit of diesel, fossil fuel, pesticide, and so on, they all are more profitable. And we're really good as a species at following short-term incentives. Long-term thinking is really hard for us. Long-term incentives don't sort of translate very well into action, and I'm as guilty as anybody else on that. But I think we're at a point now where input prices have gotten so high for diesel, for fertilizer, for fuel, for patented seeds, and so on, and farmers have gotten so good at producing so few crops that it depresses the commodity prices, then they're trapped in the middle. And so the farmers that I went to talk to, if you start talking to them about, well, you could put carbon back in the ground for the climate, I kind of got glazed eyes often. If you start with, I've heard of a way to cut your fertilizer bill in half, the usual response is, tell me more. You know, I'm all ears. And so what's giving me some optimism is if this new style of farming that is better for the land, arguably better for the climate, is a system, it's knowledge intensive. We got to figure out how to do it in different places. We have to teach it in different ways in different places, but we can teach it, and it doesn't depend on selling people products. It depends on teaching them new ways of doing things that can save them money. There's a built-in incentive system there that I think is driving a lot of farmer interest in North America that I've seen. But I was also really encouraged that it worked in places in the developing world that I'd seen. So I've gone from being a bit of a pessimist when I wrote Dirt to much more of an optimist, having seen the process turned around, and the people I see driving it are not the high-level policy people that I've talked to in the last 10 years about this issue. I've often run into sort of almost a brick wall of, well, we need modern conventional farming or we'll all starve, despite all the examples you can point them to of examples of different styles of farming that are perfectly competitive in terms of yield, once you figure out how to do it. And the thing that frustrates me greatly about that, the one study, Claire, that you showed about the no-till, is that the take-home message in that paper, the way it was written, was that no-till farming doesn't sequester carbon. But if you actually go and you read the paper and you parse it, there's a paragraph that says, well, if you actually did no-till with cover crops and a diversity of rotation, it greatly increases soil carbon.
Conservation agriculture.
Conservation agriculture,
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why wasn't that the
Conservation
headline
agriculture.
that made it in the media? In part, it's part of our academic publishing regimen, where
Yes.
if you come up with a contrarian result, you can get it in Science Nature, Nature Geosciences, or some, one of the journals that are thought to be sexier. But they buried the lead. And part of that is I think that we have not devoted a whole lot of agronomic research to systems level examinations. Things like conservation agriculture and how to adapt it in different places. We break it into parts, no-till, cover crops, rotations, and we isolate the influences. But systems of things often work differently than their individual components. Right. Look at your iPhone, look at your computer. If you just had the chip, it doesn't do you any good. You need the rest of it. I think that we need a different style of research, a different style of thinking, a different style of teaching. And at the foundation of that, it's a different style of thinking about the soil. And when I took soil science classes in graduate school, the soil biology, half the stuff I was talking about earlier, was not covered in the curriculum. That was not what soil fertility. It was kind of forgotten. Well, actually, it wasn't kind of forgotten. We didn't understand very well how it worked then. There were people who were writing about it back in as early as the 30s, but they couldn't explain the mechanisms. And as Rattan was saying, sort of combining modern science with traditional wisdom, things that worked for a long time, that's a real opportunity because we're starting to understand those interactions in a different way, which will lead us to a different style of thinking. So, I mean, I'm scared of the nuclear analogy as well, and I think it's quite apt. But I think there really is a way around it, and the reason I'm an optimist is I think that it can be a ground-up change. And if the farmers start really wanting to invest in the fertility of the land, if we start paying them for carbon credits, they're going to do it faster. It'll accelerate, and we would all benefit.
Thank you. Ray, do you want to respond to this one also?
Well, I agree with a lot of the things here said was really good. I have a different view. I've been working for the government 32 years. In the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years, the soil health movement got huge in the United States. And I said, man, we're going to go up to the chief of NRCS. He's going to sign a little paper, and it's going to be wonderful. We're going to have an army of 10 or 12,000 people, and we're going to teach, and it's going to be beautiful. Boy, was I naive. I found there's Washington, D.C., and politics and lobbyists. See, I found that there's incestual relationships with money. So I found out the best way to change the heart and the mind of the producer and start from the bottom. Some of the greatest, most powerful revolutions, the gospel, 12 men, Gandhi, 1 person. So what I am more interested in now is cultivating leaders in the community that are farmers that are doing it. I bought me a farm because if I'm teaching this, I want to have skin in the game. I want to be part of that whole process. I want to know how it feels to suffer with them, how to make the budget, how all these things work, how it feels when you lose an animal, how it feels when you lose a whole crop. I had to be in the trenches with them. See, Simon Sinek has a really good book called Leaders Eat Last. In the book, he says he went all over the world to find top leaders. Do you know where he found them? From the Marine Corps. And Simon said, well, how did the Marine Corps have so much leaders? Simple. They eat last. The sergeants and the captains. If there's no food, the leader does not eat. I'm going to tell you, there's some farmers who eat last, who spend hours of their own time teaching other farmers. We need leaders that eat last. How many of our leaders in Washington, D.C. eat last?
Go for it.
And ladies and gentlemen, that includes me too. Because see, I had to realize, you hear I'm a 55-year-old man buying a farm. Part of retirement is don't get in debt. I got in debt so I can understand how it feels to be in the trench. So we now have schools, farmers that are ecologically, holistically thinking, teach other farmers, and build community. One of the things that's hurt us in our country is individualism. It's powerful, but it's hurt us. Now we're teaching community. I'm learning from the Aussies, where they're getting groups of farmers together to teach each other, and they have two things that ought to be part of the group. One, you have to be ecologically focused, you have to be timely, you have to be committed. Number two, every farmer has to do a demonstration project and share the knowledge with the other producers. They're required. And if you don't, you're out of the group. Now think of what you just done there. When you have 100 farmers doing 100 possibilities, what to do and what not to do. Think about the power in that. Because I tell farmers, if you do this by yourself, you will work 50 farm years and you will never figure it out. It's too complex. It's too elegant.
That's an excellent segue into the next question. Yeah. You focused on farmer research. What should be studied? And so I would like to ask all of you, as you feel called, to address the question of where are the most critical research areas that we're facing? What is the science that we need to do? What are the areas we need to explore to advance the idea, the potential of soil as a way to sequester carbon, both for adaptation and
mitigation?
And let's start with Dr. Lal and Dr. Chenu.
Okay. Well, on-farm research should begin with a dialogue with farming community. I think let's first find out what their perception of soil organic matter and soil organic carbon is. How do they perceive it? And then try to verify how to build that into the scientific hypothesis. I think dialogue with them is very critical, important. On-farm research, simply doing it on station research under on-farm condition is not on-farm. It's participation. So their participation, their understanding right from the beginning so that they're part of it is very important. I think trying to go to a farmer and say, this is, I think, what you should do. No, let's find out what their constraints are, what do they perceive of organic matter, how they can be managed from their perspective. I think that's the first step. And then try to build upon that the scientific thing that we need to test under on-farm condition. I think that's the part which is, one other part which is very important to the concept of soil carbon sequestration and soil health, it's measurement and monitoring. That's a part under on-farm condition. So the question comes in, is there something that we should understand before we can manage it? Or is something we should manage and make sure that we understand what that management is all about? And that, there again, the concept should be such that we monitor scientifically those things that farmers can understand and relate to, yet we can quantify them. I think that's really the approach that we must. Eventually, we hope that whatever is proven under on-farm condition, hopefully can extrapolate it in the region under similar biophysical and socioeconomic conditions. It's the outreach, it's the scaling up, and we need farmer participation for that scaling up.
Thank you. Dr. Chanu?
Yes, well, there are many issues. Let's say, for me, maybe it's not the most groundbreaking in terms of knowledge, but for me, the priority would be to increase still the knowledge related to the benefits of soil organic matter. No farmer is going to try to store more carbon for climate. I don't believe that. Everyone, they're going to do it because there are benefits in terms of livelihoods, in terms of soil quality, of fertility. And there's a lot of knowledge out there, but still much of the knowledge is on pedoclimatic contexts that have been overstudied compared to others. We're neglecting whole areas and whole soil types in the world. And this knowledge has to be translated into tools, into something that can be used, that can be taken up by a group of farmers to really evaluate what are the benefits for them. So I think this is something. I think also the research on soil organic matter sequestration, again, should pay more attention to the diversity of soils, diversity of climates, the diversity of cropping systems. We tend to be more homogeneous. We tend to work, too many of us work on the same systems and same conditions. So I think there's really an effort to make there.
Could I just interject here another Soil 101? You both mentioned climate change mitigation and then also climate change adaptation. And I wonder if you could just distinguish between those two a little bit for us.
Okay, so climate change mitigation is reducing the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So emitting less N2O, emitting less methane, and storing more carbon to end in emitting less CO2. Climate change adaptation is that we're going, well, it's already there, to a climate that has more variability, more extreme events, more drought events, more flood events, more in many areas of the world, more intense rains, so more exposure to erosion. And climate change adaptation is the ability of agroecosystems to withstand this. And it goes through changes in soil's matter there, and soil organic matter matters. It's holding more water, having a better structure that can resist to erosion, infiltrating more water. And yes, so this is more climate change adaptation is more related to the effect of soil organic matter on soil properties. And in general, I think we tend to work, the scientific community works much more on climate change mitigation than on climate change adaptation. So this is, again, we should work more on how soil organic matter affects our properties. We know it affects, but how much, where, which soil, at which speed. I don't know if I answered.
Yes, thank you.
I completely agree with what Claire said. That's absolutely correct. Very good definition. In addition, I would like to add, adaptation also implies looking for new opportunities that may arise. That's a very important part. After all, agriculture began after the last ice age because the temperatures increased. And it became what we call long summer. Agriculture would have never have started unless that global warming had happened. So, yes, we have many disadvantages, correct. But nature never gives only disadvantages. There are some hidden merits somewhere. It's up to us to find out and adapt to them. If we close our eyes that this is absolutely, completely wrong, whatever is happening, we might miss out something that was hidden there. So adaptation also means looking for any new opportunities that may arise. Personally, I'm going to grow bananas in my backyard.
Thank you. A question from the audience that I think is an important one. We have a vision for policy, we have a vision for something that might work, but the question is, what are the risks? what are the dangers we might be missing in an approach that focuses on soil as a way to store carbon, as a way to mitigate or adapt to climate change? What should be the mistakes or the things that we should be thinking about as we move forward?
Maybe I can take
Yes.
a stab at that from my perspective in the forest, where across the forested landscape of Canada, there's a great deal of homogenization going on, and through cutting and planting. And with that homogenization, is a reduction in biodiversity, and with that goes flexibility and adaptability. And I think that one of the mistakes and risks of trying to manage carbon is that we continue down that track. And I've seen forests converted from old growth forests of mixed species to single species plantations, and the loss of carbon at all horizons, all the way down into the deep horizons, where, as Dr. Lal talked about, that's where the very old and ancient carbon is stored and very stable, that we've lost about half of it. And we don't even realize that we're doing it. We think that we're, going along with good management as long as we put those plants back, as long as they grow back. The problem is that we're not putting the right combinations back, and we're not letting them grow for as long as they, for hundreds of years as they've been adapted to do. And with that, we lose. We're losing, and we don't even know that we're losing.
Carbon completely. I want to say a few words.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Go ahead. You're
Yeah.
on. You're on.
Okay. I was just mentioning that carbon stock in soil has two distinct but related components. Organic carbon, all three of us have mostly talked organic carbon. Claire talked about it, I talked about it. There's also inorganic carbon. And inorganic carbon stock is much greater in the arid climates than it is in humid climates. These are carbonates and bicarbonates. In fact, their concentration is a lot greater. When we talk about carbon sequestration, we should consider both. Missing out inorganic carbon would be a mistake. You talked about mistake. For example, we have a lot of irrigated area in the western United States, California, Arizona, even Colorado and New Mexico, other places. In irrigated agriculture, when you are irrigating with good quality water, that means the salt concentration in water is less, leaching of bicarbonates happens. That's one part. Bicarbonates are leached out in the groundwater, eventually they may precipitate and get out of the circulation carbon. The other process which is equally important, it's related to, for example, we have been talking about compost. David Montgomery talked about compost, manure, everything else. When the carbon dioxide is released through decomposition of the manure that was added, and if that CO2 is dissolved in the solution in soil, it forms dilute carbonic acid. If that carbonic acid precipitates as carbonates of calcium, magnesium, potassium, provided that carbonates came from outside the system, that is a sequestration. And on a very large area of arid climates, especially our rangeland and so forth, we have a tendency to ignore it. As a basic scientist on soil carbon sequestration, that part should not be ignored. And in our teaching curriculum, we should consider that. Clay mineralogy plays a very important role. So scientists in Middle East, Israel, Australia, drier part, scientists in Southwest United States, drier part of Canada, other parts, that's a very important component that we really should consider.
Thank you. And thank you for your answers. We are out of time. We are not out of questions. But we will keep going. This is a good point to highlight. There was a question I would have done next had we more time, which was a question about, well, what can we all do? Particularly, what can we as college students do? And we weren't going to be able to answer that here, but if you look at the writings of our authors and some of our other discussions, you will see opportunities to think about that. We also now are going into a time when you can go out and think about different ways what this means. We have our interlude now of 3:30 to 5 with a number of different activities. There's some information about rainfall simulation and soil quality out front of the building. an exhibit on tillage systems. And then if you follow the signs, we have the Big Hill Farm, we have the soil pit, and at 4:15, a dance about soil and these topics. So go out and enjoy.
And just a reminder, a couple more things. One of them is that the Unchi Makka presentation will be in Beck, and that's specifically room 101. It's not in the program, so Beck 101 for Francis Bettelyoun's presentation. Also, please don't leave anything in this room tonight. It will be cleaned, and everything will be taken to the lost and found, so please don't leave anything. A reminder, tonight looks different from the way it sometimes does. We invite you to take part in the soil experience. We also invite you to come right up to this corner and experience Bookworms, reader's theater about using soil in literature, including Nobel Prize-winning literature. And then, of course, as always, the Nobel concert coming at 8 o'clock. So use your syllabus to find your way through the next few hours. Thank you all.